Good afternoon everyone and welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for all of my new subscribers. I really appreciate you taking the time to subscribe to my channel. And for any of you old subscribers, if you can go back and check your settings and make sure that you're subscribed, and you also hit that notification bell which will let you know each time I upload new content. Someone said something to me the other day which made me realise they weren't getting notifications about my latest videos. So just in case that's you as well, I'm just asking all of my subscribers to go back and double check, number one, that they are subscribed, and number two, they've hit that notification bell so every time I upload, you'll be notified. Okay, so today's topic comes courtesy of Paddy. Thank you very much for suggesting this topic. I'm sure a lot of people may also have the same sort of question, but they weren't quite sure whether or not to ask it, but it's fine. So Paddy asked me to do a video on the pros and cons of being tall. For those of you who don't know, I'm 6'7". I've lost an inch somehow, interestingly. I was measured in February of this year when I was getting ready for my second round of surgery, and we discovered I'm 6'7", not 6'8". So I'm now having to adjust to saying I'm 6'7". I've been either 6'7" or 6'8" from the time I was 13 up till now. This is going to be a two-part video. When I was mapping it out earlier, I thought it would be too long just to put all in one video, so I'm going to divide it into two. This video here is going to be talking about my life growing up as a tall person and some of the things I experienced. And the second part is going to be me discussing what I think the pros and cons are. So if you want to hear my story of what I experienced growing up as a tall woman in London, keep watching. Okay, so I've always been a little bit taller than everybody else. I come from a tall family. There are tall people on both my mother's side and my father's side. Me and my sisters, in fact all my siblings and I, were taller than average. We always have been. We were always just maybe like this much taller than people. And then looking back now, I recall that when I was in 4th year of primary school, that's when I was about 12 going on 13. And I recall that there were increased trips to the nurse's office. I was seen by one particular nurse. I remember seen by another guy as well. Either my mother or my father would accompany me on those appointments, which was unusual, but I didn't really think too much about it. Then there were hospital visits as well. This also involved me being taken out of school. These happened maybe like 3 or 4 times in that year. I know now that what they were doing was trying to track my height, because I know there's a way to predict, based upon family genetics, how tall an individual would be. And there were obviously been signs of my growing quite rapidly, and they wanted to monitor it to make sure that my growth was as a result of genetics and not as a result of an illness. There are certain people who've grown exceedingly tall as a result of having a tumour on the pituitary gland, and that's a gland that secretes growth hormone. Now when you get a tumour, it secretes too much growth hormone too quickly, and a person can grow dangerously tall over a very short period of time. But that's not what was happening in my case. I was just growing very fast. So it didn't bother me. There wasn't any big thing about it. Do you know what I mean? I wasn't that tall as far as I knew. I was just me, right? And then when I went into secondary school, yeah, it was a whole new set of people, and I had to get used to seeing this tall person. Never seen anybody as tall as me. There was a stirring. There was the, oh my gosh, all of that in the beginning. But then that eventually died down and just got used to me. But then when I turned maybe 13 or 14, I observed that there was a change in how people were treating me in the street. I was getting laughed at, I was getting called names, people would point and snicker and all kinds of things. I was wondering why that was, because you can't see yourself growing. You can't see how tall you are. So I had no idea that anything major had shifted, but obviously it had, because this was not the treatment I was getting just the year previously when I was in the street. So they kept on going about how tall I was, but I've always kind of been tall, so I don't see what the big deal is. I hadn't even observed that I'd grown any further. And that started to wear on me a bit, you know. It was compounded when I would try to find clothes for school trips. Those were my biggest nightmare. I hated those. Everybody would come in the latest designs and latest fashions, and they all looked really good, and I had to get my clothes from an old person shop or from a mature woman shop, because there was nothing for someone of my height in those days. Bear in mind I was like 13, 14 and I was 6'7". So there was no clothing for me at that time. I think I did go up and visit Long Tall Sally, but the clothes were very expensive, and I was not feeling the designs at all. They were not young, hip and happening, put it that way. And so I just didn't get anything from there. But yeah, I hated those things. I hated when we had opportunity to wear our own clothes, because I knew I couldn't compete, or I knew that I'd always be the odd one out. But I got through that. That wasn't really too bad. Then we joined with a boys' school. I used to go to a school called Notre Dame. And in the second year, our school closed down and we merged with a boys' school, which was called John Griffiths. And I spent my third year of secondary school in a mixed school. And yet again, it's the same thing in the initial stages, like the mocking and whatever. But then once people got used to seeing me, it all stopped. But the problems on the outside seemed to increase. And my situation was different. In school, I was safe. School was my safe place. School was my happy place. But it's when I went beyond the school walls that I'd always get these issues. There's all these confrontations that were happening. I didn't know how to deal with these unwarranted aggressions that were coming against me, because I don't come from that sort of family. My mother always taught us never start trouble, but if trouble comes your way, you defend yourself. So I wasn't starting trouble, so I couldn't figure out why these people were coming towards me. And it was just about something I couldn't do anything about. Do you know what I mean? I just didn't know how to respond. I'm talking about, it was boys, it was girls, it was grown-ups as well, because they just assumed because I was tall, I must be older, right? And I wasn't. So that was becoming a bit of a problem. And then, but I love school. School I absolutely loved. And then when I went to college, it was the same kind of situation. People saw me, then they got used to me and blah, blah, blah. But again, I was having more and more run-ins with people on public transport, on the train, on the road. It was just becoming really exhausting. By that time, I'd become very, very self-conscious, extremely self-conscious. I didn't really like going out much. I would take the shortcuts if I absolutely had to go outside. Like if my mum sent me on an errand, I would find the quickest way of getting there, and the way which meant I'd see the least amount of people, because my mission was to get to and from my assignments as unscathed as possible. Wasn't always successful, but that was what I tried to do. And yeah, I was very self-conscious by this point. And I remember this is where I started praying to God and asking God to reduce my height. Both my mother and father are Catholic, but in the afternoons, on Sunday afternoon, my father would take us to a Pentecostal church. So that's where we learned about praying and fasting and, God answering prayer and all that kind of stuff. So I started praying and asking God to make me smaller. So I mapped out, I stood against the wall and drew where my forehead was. Then I'd pray, okay, God, take 1 inch from my face, 2 inches from my torso, 2 inches from my thighs, and 2 inches from my shins, and everything would be great. And I would fast sometimes, and I just kept on asking God, please make me smaller, please make me smaller. You can see what I'm going through. I hate all of this, it's too much, please make it stop, make me smaller. And I just kept on with that. And then things really came to a head when I went to Nigeria. Now, I'm Nigerian, just in case you don't know. And I'm assuming all families, all immigrant families, shall we say, it's important for the children to go back home as often as they possibly can, but certainly at least once, so they can say we've touched the soil, we've met our relatives, we've gone back to our country, we've mingled with our people, we can say we've been there. That's quite important. So the day came that my father took all of us to go. It was nice meeting some of my relatives, but then what I call one of the key defining moments of my life occurred. Because we're taught that you're from Nigeria, you're from Anambra State, Onitsha, this is where you're from, these are who your people are, this is home. So for whatever I was going through in London, I always assumed that when I went back to Nigeria, or when I visited Nigeria, that wouldn't happen because these are my people. I'm suffering here because London is a melting pot of all kinds of different races, that's why that's happening. But if I went back to the country of my origin, where my family are, where my ancestors have been, where my roots are, where my heritage is, I should be able to fit in. There shouldn't be any problem. I couldn't have been more wrong. It was worse there than in London. And I remember one particular incident that just will forever be in my mind. We had gone to a pretty large market. I can't remember if it was in Lagos or in Onitsha. I think it was in Onitsha village. And We just went to go and buy some stuff. We went to go and get some clothing material because we wanted to get someone to sew some clothes for us. And we went to the market, and then I don't know how long we'd been there, not up to 15 minutes, I'd say. And then all of a sudden we noticed these people running and packing their stuff away. Now, not everybody who was there trading was trading legally. So we assumed that the police were coming, or there'd been some kind of warning or alert that the police were coming, so running to put away their wares. That's how frantically they were moving. And my auntie asked one of the traders, what's going on? And he said, they're putting away their stuff, so come and stare at her, talking about me. I thought, and it's my sister who translates that for me, I thought, that can't be right. Why would they do that? But it was right. And within, I don't know, 1 or 2 minutes, I couldn't even count how many people there were. It just seems like there just was no end to the rows of people who were there, jeering, pointing, laughing, mocking. And I was just flabbergasted. Like, you had men, you had women, you had children. For me, one of the biggest shocks was these people were prepared to lose money just so they can stand around laughing and gawking and cussing me out. So it got to the point where they're pressing in, they're being so aggressive in their behavior that the market trader, once he realized that we spoke the same tongue as him, he got out of the stick and started to beat them back. He just really, get back, what's wrong with you? Move. And he kept on beating them back. And they would just like, let him move on and then come back. And I said to my aunt, I think you guys need to leave. Just so that everything could die down, just leave. So we found a cab and got in, and then they were on the windows banging and staring, and it was just ridiculous. Now that for me was a very defining moment, because it was at that moment I felt that I didn't belong anywhere. I didn't have a home, because I'd been taught that this was my home, i.e. Nigeria, i.e. Onitsha. That's where we belong, that's where our people are from, and they would embrace us because this is home, right? And home is where you're safe. So if I was being treated that way and rejected worse than I was in London, then clearly I had no home and I belonged nowhere. And I'll never forget that sense of not belonging. And I remember during that time, I had this image of the world and me floating on the outside of it. I'll never forget, such a powerful image. And that at that point, I wouldn't say I had a breakdown, but that's kind of the point where I gave up. Do you know what I'm saying? I was so angry at God, and I was saying, do you know what? If you don't want to hear me, you don't want to answer me, you're quite content to allow that to happen, I don't want to know. Screw this Christian stuff, I don't want to know. And so when I got back home, I started investigating witchcraft. I started investigating voodoo, white magic, black magic. It's no such thing. It's all the same. And every time I'd go to somebody and ask them, well, could they make me smaller? They'd always say, no, we just don't have the power to do that. I remember one day, there's a friend I used to have, she used to do tarot cards. Just say, ask the cards a question. And I'd always ask a question, will I be made smaller? And the cards would always say no, no matter what. No matter how I phrase the question, the answer would always come back, no, I will not be made smaller. And then I got really tired of these people. I thought, well, maybe these guys are very tame. They just don't really have the full power, the full ability to tap into that magical power to do what I want them to do. And then I learned of this witch doctor over here, he's from Haiti. Of the Haitians that practice magic, they're renowned for being very good at it. So I thought, okay, I'm gonna go down there. Now, at this time, I should mention, how old was I? I was about, I'd say I was late teens to early 20s. I put myself between 18 and 23 when this was happening. And I took a cab down there because it got to the point where I wouldn't walk out on the street. I just wouldn't walk out on the street. If I had to go outside, I would take a cab because I just did not want to engage with anybody. I just was now so emotionally fragile. I just would not be able to take one more confrontation. So I jumped in a cab and I went down there. Now, I don't know if you've ever seen this James Bond film. I believe it's called You Only Live Twice, right? And they were in, I think they were in Haiti in the film. There's that guy, he had all the witchcraft paraphernalia, and it was all like grass and skulls and this, that, and the other. It just really set the scene like this is witchcraft country, And when I got to the man's shop, inside the shop, you could feel it was very dark and this man was serious about what he was doing. And I just all of a sudden really got scared. I backed out of the shop really quickly. So I saw a phone box, which was probably no more than 150 feet away. So I went into the phone box and called him, and he answered. So he was in there, but as I suspected, he was in the back. And I felt really silly saying it. No matter how many times I asked people in that field to make me small, I always felt silly saying the words. And I stuttered it out, I saw your advert and apparently got a lot of powers, and I was just wondering if you'd be able to reduce my height. Without missing a beat, the man said, of course I can't, I'm not God. I was like, oh, alrighty then, thank you. And I hung up. Well, I'm not going to challenge the man. I'm not going to say to him, well, I thought you lot were renowned for your voodoo and you're able to do this and the other, man. What's going on? What if you turned me into a reptile? What then? At that point, I had more than enough problems. I didn't need to be adding anything else to it. So I left it alone. So I got in my cab and I went home. And then at this point, I don't know how long after, but I thought, you know something, there's got to be a way to make me smaller. You guys are just rubbish. Either you're too afraid or you're just rubbish. I don't know, but there's got to be a way. I was convinced there had to be a way. And then just backtrack slightly. Prior to this, I've been investigating getting my height reduced surgically because I'd read somewhere that it was possible, but it's a very seldom performed operation because the risk of dying is very high. You won't come out proportional. Basically, the chances are that if you went in for a height reducing operation, you'd end up far worse coming out than you went in. And I remember the person who I was speaking to about, he did his best to try and say to me, or try to encourage me to not pursue that route. And there's an article he showed me, this poor man, this was back in the 60s, if I'm not mistaken. He was 7'5" at the age of 15. And one can only imagine what that was like. He was an English guy, and one can only imagine what he was going through. Obviously, it was like what I was going through, but possibly 1,000 times worse. And he had somehow managed to get this operation, and it just kind of ruined him, really. He was now very disproportionate. He could tie his shoelaces without bending over because they couldn't do anything with his arms. They couldn't shorten his arms. So he just looked worse after the operation than before. So I had ruled that out as an avenue. So I got the bright idea of performing my own ritual. And I remember I got the card, I did a pentagram on it, I got my special candles and this, that, and the other, and I said one spell, what I thought was a spell, and then I'd written a contract and I burnt it, because that's supposed to like seal the deal, right? And I left the candles burning on the card, and then I fell asleep. It was like a very big sheet, almost like A1 size. When I woke up, 2 of the candles had burnt through the card and the carpet was now on fire. And my duvet was just about to be ignited when I'd woken up. So I had to quickly scrabble and put out the fire, and I was shaking once that happened. After that, I was sat on my bed and I was shaking. And I realized that my desire to be acceptable in other people's eyes nearly cost me my life. And that's the bottom line. So I thought, okay, the occult way is not the way to go. It really isn't the way to go. Find another way of doing it. And so I went back to praying. That's the only thing I knew. I didn't know anything else. So I went back to praying. So I'd pray and 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 I'd pray. I prayed for years. Then I remember very clearly, I was living with a lady in Camden. And just before I was about to pray, I very clearly heard something. It was a voice I heard, but obviously it was only me who heard it. If anybody else had been in that room, they would not have been able to hear it. And the voice said, "Do not ask me to reduce your height again." I was like, okay, well, I haven't actually started praying yet, but whatever, okay. And then it came again. It's not I cannot make you smaller, but I will not make you smaller. I say you are fearfully and wonderfully made, and light has no communion with darkness. Now I knew, for me, that was God speaking to me directly, because that, I say you're fearfully and wonderfully made, it's a psalm found in scripture. And what it meant was, the light was that there was nothing wrong with how I was created. I was created perfectly. The darkness was the negative reactions I was getting towards my height, the lies, the snickering, the cussing, ugliness, that was darkness, and they were lies. The truth is that I'm beautiful and fearfully, wonderfully made. The lie is that there is something wrong with me, I need to change it. And I was to put away the lie and focus on what the truth was. From that moment up until this very day, I have never, ever, ever had an issue with my height ever again. Not even a little bit. That occurred pre-2000. I remember that. I think it was between 97 and 99 this happened. And from that time up until this time, I have never, ever, ever had any issue with my height. I even went so far as buying 2 pairs of shoes that had 3-inch heels. And I wore those things down to the nub. You couldn't tell me anything when I was wearing those heels. I felt amazing. I didn't feel that much taller than anybody else. I loved the fact that I had these shoes that had 3-inch heels and they were super comfortable, and I absolutely loved wearing them. So that's the story of what I experienced as someone growing up very tall in London. So stay tuned for part 2 of this video, where I share with you what I feel the pros and cons are of being tall. If you've liked this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to leave a comment. If you haven't subscribed, please consider subscribing. Take care and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.